Hello and welcome everybody. We're just going to kind of let everybody take their virtual seats and get comfortable and everything else. This session is a new one we're embarking on here with Ricoh, our strategic partner. I'm Marcus Timpson. I'm and co-founder of a business called FM Future. We launched Future Print about 12 to 18 months ago. The growing community focused on the future of print technology. In particular, we have an interest in inkjet, in industrial inkjet, which we believe is a key technology for digital manufacturing. So what we've done today is we've assembled a fantastic panel, including John Patsavelis from Cranfield University, a leading university for engineering and manufacturing excellence. Barry Maybank from Manufacturing Technology Centre, again, another organization that has a mission to really sort of take manufacturing forward with new technologies based in the UK, and Ben Sheridan from BSI. And BSI also work in partnership with lots of different companies to help them crystallize their manufacturing strategies for the future. And Richard Darling also with over 20 years experience with digital printing and it more latterly with industrial inkjet printing from Ricoh Europe. So welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
It's a big subject to try and encapsulate in an hour, I think, digital manufacturing, and we kind of pigeonholed it on the year ahead. We do have an agenda, and we're going to ask the following, and we're going to be following this kind of path throughout the hour. Clearly it's going to deviate and go around, and our panel will, I'll keep this relatively free flowing. We won't be using the slides all the way through, so it won't, and I'm going to revert to full screen shortly, but this is the kind of agenda that I'm going to be following, and it's going to also opportunities to ask questions and of the panel as well as we go through. So please do make comment and ask questions. A couple of very quick slides. Surveys we do throughout the year, and we've done now 2 or 3, particularly during the COVID period, just to see what people's attitudes. We have about 140 people responded from across the world, from 20 different countries. A couple of key things that I think perhaps underline the interest in digital manufacturing. What is your priority with technology now? 65% have answered that technology that enables better efficiency is the priority, and I believe that is a key pillar for digital manufacturing in terms of its value in manufacturing. Secondly, do you think challenges with general manufacturing and retail supply chain, particularly we saw in the first half of last year, will lead to any of the following? Obviously, an increase in collaboration we saw to solve those problems, but 52% said we expect to see an increase in digital manufacturing to help supply or help solve future supply problems. So interest has intensified in digital manufacturing. So if we flip back to the agenda, and I think it's kind of an important thing to start on really, is what is digital manufacturing? How does it relate to Industry 4.0 and the Internet of Things? And as with all new technologies, or relatively new technologies, we need to kind of demystify it behind the hype. So I'm going to ask the panel to start by defining what is digital manufacturing. So John, I think we're going to start with you because you're at Cranfield University. So we're going to start with the kind of learned position that you inhabit. So what is digital manufacturing and its relationship with Internet 4.0 and so on?
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject. Everybody's really interested in knowing more about this and getting away from the fog of so many terms and acronyms. For me, digital manufacturing is the digital thread. The digital thread, which means data files which are really usable across the supply chain, within the value chain of the business, without having to do any pre-processing, any post-processing. They are ready to be used to manufacture product, which means that they have the accurate geometric dimensions and clear and correct bill of materials. So for me, any business that strives to be a player in digital manufacturing needs to look at the digital data product files that they have and see whether they are clean and ready to be used throughout their supply chain, because then they have something of great value.
Right. So it's very much about the digitization. Now, I get confused a little with Industry 4.0, how that relates to digital manufacturing, because there's obviously an Industry 3.0 as well. Barry, so is it digital manufacturing if you have a digital kind of beginning but an analog output? Is that digital manufacturing in the sense that we're talking about today?
Yeah, I mean, just building on what John said there. I mean, I come from an operational and technology background. I kind of bring the worlds together, as it were. And there's a lot of talk about convergence of more the operational technology, for example, in the factory line, with digital. But we need to look at that kind of wider integration that John's alluding to across the supply chain into customers, because it's all about driving demand, ultimately, which is where we're kind of coming from. And if we think about some of the challenges there, really, we're in a world where we need to be more flexible, more responsive, more open to opportunity. We need to break the silos and start to kind of gel things, integrate things together through data. So we really are talking about moving from kind of islands of technology and human interaction, which are typically constrained in some way, to starting to connect those things together. Now, you mentioned Industry 4.0. I mean, Industry 4.0 is a it's an umbrella term, isn't it? It's typically a bunch of technologies like cloud, for example, and other things as well, Internet of Things, to be able to join things together. So really what we're doing is applying Industry 4 technology to enable us to transform manufacturing into this new world that enables us to flex and respond and take these opportunities, as well as respond to kind of constraints around efficiency and productivity. So that's how I sort of see it. I think I'm consistent with John there. It really is about how do we connect things, and without overlaying terms too much here, that digital thread, data's at the heart of that, and how do we transfer data, if you like, along the way. But that's a big thing in its own right. But I'll stop there and let the others chip in as well.
Okay, brilliant. Ben, thanks for that, Barry. So from what I'm hearing from what the guys are saying, this digital manufacturing, you shouldn't really be dabbling in it. This is a strategic thing, isn't it? This is like, actually, it's the whole business. It's the whole thing. It's a change in thinking. Is that right?
That's right. The philosophy that is digital manufacturing really comes from.
You're a bit quiet. You're a little bit quiet. I don't know why.
Hear me now?
Yeah, that's much better. Yeah.
Philosophy of digital manufacturing really comes from putting data at the heart of the business and making decisions based on that data. It's not always necessarily more data, but it's data you can trust, or it might be more timely, and that you can do more things with as a result. And can make better decisions. It could be a human being making that decision, or it could be a machine making that decision. But that will only happen if you have a plan in place and a strategy in place to be able to do that. And so, if we encourage companies the management of companies to really think about how they can use digital to improve their business, they will get much better investments and much better outcomes as a result.
So really, I mean, to sort of general manufacturing, then it's about digitization and really moving beyond what we'd call the kind of old way of doing things, where perhaps COVID revealed to be a little bit inflexible and not able to deliver against a sort of fiercely changing environment. Richard, I want to draw you in here. So impact of COVID. Now, I think this has relevance for your experience too within Inkjet. What kind of headline things do you think impact of COVID perhaps has had on the world of manufacturing generally?
Well, I think it's interesting that Barry mentioned that driving demand. I think this has been a period where demand hasn't needed to be driven. It's actually needed to be met. So in normal times, when everybody's trying to increase their sales to their existing customer bases, maybe get a few extra customers, we have to try and drive and attract new for the same things. And what we found during this period of the last 9-10 months is that there were shortages of some things, and there were new demands, new needs for certain other things, and ranging from PPE to basic foodstuffs or all sorts of different things. And it wasn't any longer a question of driving demand. It was a question of meeting demand that was there already. So that automatically makes me think, well, that's an example of where we've changed from a push to a pull. When you change from push to pull, then you have to be able to respond to different demands. And it's no longer you just produce millions the same and then you just try and find homes for them. You're actually trying to supply what people want to react to their demand, their real demand. That means that you haven't got the opportunities to change tooling. You haven't got the opportunities for that missing link in the connectivity between places and machines and processes. So for me, it opened up a few possibilities and thoughts into how the flexibility and nimbleness could be improved. And there are some cases where if we carried on doing the same kind of digitizing of manufacturing as were in place before COVID, then that just simply doesn't make sense. So there are new forms of new places where it does make sense. And that's, I'm sure the other guys will talk on this too, but it's a balance of whether it's going to help you to meet demand, whether it's going to help you to meet it better with something that's better, whether it's or at all, and how it changes the cost, because digital manufacturing can cost more, particularly in the imaging side of things, decoration, for example, or it can cost the same, or it can cost less. It depends how you measure it. So you've got to take into account the cost, and I think that's what it said in the survey. Efficiency can mean different things, and it's not just efficiency; it's efficiency of the whole operation.
Yeah.
So we could go into some examples of where it doesn't make sense and where it does make sense.
Yeah. So it's just no, that's good. I mean, in terms of the impact of COVID, the drivers for adoption, I think we've all heard this anecdotally, but I'm interested in what the guys have you actually seen an increase, a sort of material increase in digital manufacturing activity, perhaps in the UK, which is obviously where the gents are more focused on. Have you seen this, John? Is this something that's real? This COVID accelerated to the extent we think it has?
It has accelerated some people, and I've written a couple of papers with some of my colleagues on some of the impact that COVID has had in some industries. The people that were prepared and they had made the right investments, or they were ready to make the right investments, they were prepared both financially, they prepared, they knew the technology, they had a network of people that they could rely on and ask them questions to help them. They moved fast, and they've experienced, in some cases, a 5-fold increase in the space of less than a year, which is incredible. Some examples, inkjet printers. People who had inkjet printing assets, signage, demand for signage, stand here, stay apart for 2 meters. Everybody wanted signage in different substrates. The demand went off the scale. And these people were busier than ever, and they were able to respond very flexible because they had digital inkjet printing. There are other people that dealt in PPE. They had technology, which I know Ricoh was one of them, but certainly I know of a company that used photopolymer 3D printing, and they were just making machines for other people. And then they realized we can do this for ourselves because the demand is so high. So very quickly, they went from being very small to being quite sizable, and taking a technology which was still growing by something like 2 or 3% a year to something like 30%, 40% growth in less than a year. So that was the pivot point. There are examples, many more examples there, but COVID has accelerated in some cases, but it has benefited people who were already there mentally. They had the infrastructure, they had some technology, they knew the people, they had an open mindset of sharing. A lot of people, your survey says collaboration. Collaboration needs cooperation, and for cooperation to happen, people need to be willing to play and to share. There needs to be a kind of framework for them to cooperate. Like we know the moonshot of creating a lot of ventilators. The government provided the infrastructure, provided the framework for people to collaborate, and boy, did they collaborate. The cooperation there was phenomenal. And they used some digital technologies like augmented reality to train. I know Barry may have had some experience on that. Yes, many examples, and many examples where people actually did not believe their data, because as my colleagues Ben said, if you have data but you don't really believe it, you have to wait for someone to sanitize it at the end of the month, at the end of a quarter. It's way too slow for things like COVID. You have to have clean data that you believe, and actually that's what Industry 4.0 does. It enables you to have real-time clean data on your gross profit, on your costs, on your revenue. And we know from the paradigm of Amazon that actually wins the game. Why? Because if I know I can believe what I'm saying, I am confident to invest more in digital technology because I know I'm building something on something that's clean, and I can use it for my decision making. Oh, of course, I can go further than that then on machine learning, which is identifying patterns, or even AI. And by the way, surveys that I've seen, a lot of companies think, how are you doing with your digital transformation? They say, oh, we're all below average. Not everybody can be below average. But what happens here is we see in the media all these great examples we talked about, and say everybody thinks, oh, I'm so far away from them. Now, because of things like COVID, that may be true. A lot of people may be further behind, may be left further behind. That's why part of your survey showed that people realize now they have to go that way. But to get that way, they need to look at what they have today. How well are they using it? How clean is their data on their ERP system?
Yeah.
How well have they connected the PLCs and the HMIs and the SCADAs? How have they got SCADA? Come on. I said to my students, I had Industry 4.0 25 years ago. I had Starship Enterprise in a place that makes sugar in this country. We ran a massive plant with 15 people. And every plant, every vessel, every pipe, every valve, every motor had PID control on touch screens. Why? Because that company had a lot of money. Today, that's affordable for anybody, for SMEs. But how? It's actually get some help, because we lack in this country people who are familiar with operational technology and information technology. And this is where I'm sure people like Barry and what he does with the MTC and the catapults come really, really handy. So I strongly recommend people reach out to him and his organization.
Yeah. So on that note, Barry, then.
I'll chip in.
Following on from that. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I mean, we're part of, I don't know whether people know the MTC, but we're part of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. So we're not a commercial organization. We're there to really draw on innovation, but not everybody wants to be super innovative. Some people just want to adopt things in an innovative way for them. So we're really there as a transitional organization to kind of de-risk and really drive that adoption as part of that kind of wider catapult center. So we work across, across industry, not just large OEM, providers, but mid-cap and SME organizations as well. So a real kind of mix, really. I think I'm echoing what the guys are saying. I think people appreciate this. There are winners and losers, but that readiness that John talks about and Richard talks about is a sort of key denominator. Now, if you're in the aerospace industry, maybe it's not your time at the moment, but it is your time to look at what's coming and what we can get ourselves ready for to exploit as we move forward, as we come out of this. Other industries like pharmaceuticals and life sciences, it definitely is your time, right? How do we all know about vaccines? John mentioned the ventilator challenge. We need to really look at how we accelerate things from R&D, if you're in pharmaceuticals, through to production and kind of quality. So we're seeing winners and losers, but I think that key denominator is that kind of readiness. And I think I kind of echo what some of the guys are saying there. I think we are seeing a lot more organizations getting ready. They've already dipped the toe in the water. But I think what we saw before COVID was a lot of proof of concepts and a lot of stovepipes and a lot of just introduction of technology. I think what we're seeing now, and it's not just code, is it? We need to think about post-Brexit and the kind of global trading stage and making ourselves more competitive. We need to think about the way forward as well. So there's a lot of readiness, but there are barriers, to entry. Now we're going to talk about those, in a short while, aren't we? But we mentioned the ventilator challenge. I mean, that was a good example. John referred to it, didn't he? But
explain what happened there.
People know about that a little bit. You know, people know the business problem, don't they? It's kind of like how do we get ventilators out there in production? You know, kind of working. And the problem was there was a number of ventilator designs, but there was no scale up. The production just wasn't working. So there's a team that kind of came together, and it's really a kind of good example of the best of, you know, what does good look like. So a team came together, or various teams came together. We probably know people like McLaren, we've heard of this, and Rolls-Royce and BAE Systems, all lending different sort of skill sets. And that's a really good example of multidisciplinary working, and actually deploying digital kind of quickly requires a partnership and an ecosystem. It's a really good example of kind of ecosystem of small, sharp teams in a sort of sprint mentality, so a really quick mentality. So simple examples were that the product design was sort of taken, but what we didn't have, or the industry didn't have, was a scaled out process for production. So there's a really rapid approach to designing the kind of production line, if you like, then commissioning the line, in parallel training the operatives in that line that had to be socially distanced to get production out of the back end. So there's lots of digital interventions, if you like, along that kind of value chain, from design for manufacture. John mentioned mixed reality. So things like advanced simulation was used to prove out some of that design before it was commissioned. Simulation techniques like discrete event modeling, I don't want to just throw terms at it here, were used to kind of virtually commission the operational environment before it was physically commissioned. And what that meant was that using things like mixed reality, we could start to introduce the operators into the line to kind of train them up virtually in parallel. So a lot of these interventions were made to really compress that timeline and de-risk that timeline. Now, not everybody's into, we need a new production of a new product, but I think there's so many lessons learned there. And it really is a good example of how things can be done, how things can be accelerated and de-risked along the way. I'll talk more later on as we get into barriers to adoption, because people out there are probably thinking, well, I want to learn more, but I haven't got the time or I haven't got the know-how. So how do I do that? How do I get on board? What is my roadmap? So we'll talk more about those things a bit later on, but certainly our role at the MTC is to help organizations kind of get on board and accelerate their adoption, be it the small organizations or the large organizations.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for that, Ben. Moving on to you with your work with BSI, you've clearly seen and worked with people that are developing strategies. What is this kind of thing that chime with what you've seen?
Very much. I mean, just back to the Ventilator Challenge, for example.
Yeah.
I was rung up on the Saturday after the Ventilator Challenge consortium was set up by Sam Turner. They were desperate because they didn't know how to get all these aerospace and automotive manufacturers to start making legally regulatory compliant devices. These are excellent manufacturers, they have excellent management systems, but they didn't know where the gap was in their own management systems that would potentially stop them getting these things onto market legally. So we put some advice into that and we helped them do that. And it happened quite quickly, and it proved that they were able to do it. But what it did show is that, as well as using all these clever digital technologies to be able to collaborate so much better and to start scaling up the manufacture of these devices, you also needed a different approach to regulation. Not the regulation itself, how you approach compliance. You don't just look at it as an insurmountable hurdle and don't do things. You see it as a challenge to be met. And that was a very important step within the Ventilator Challenge consortium that they took. It was a very creative and very productive way of going about doing it. And to go back to another point, Barry mentioned the word readiness. Last year, or was it the year before, BSI published PAS 1040, which is all about, it's focused particularly at SME manufacturers and helping them think about how they start to go about understanding where they are digitally, how ready they are to start using digital in their business and to start exploiting it properly. and there's a scale 1 to 9 within that they can rank themselves. Now, it's only the beginning, it's not the answer, but I would suggest any manufacturer thinking about looking at themselves to start to develop strategies for exploiting digital, they should start to look at that, which is a really good piece of advice. Now, it doesn't say this is the technology you should use. Invest in that and everything will be great. If you're quite low on that digital readiness, it'll say go away and create a strategy for your future business growth, and then come back and think about how digital might help you do that. So this story that John and Barry and Richard have been talking about of companies looking at digital readiness, and those that do best are those that plan further in the past, further into the future, if that makes sense. Chimes very much with our experiences with PAS 1040.
Yeah, so it's starting where John mentioned. The fact is, people that are kind of digital ready, have an open mind, perhaps are not rigidly stuck to a certain way of doing things. So probably, if we're looking at the chasm or the crossing the chasm principle, those early adopter businesses that are just further in front. But then equally, I guess what COVID's done is compounded time and clear need. So it's probably shaken traditional industry into looking at this. But then on the flip side of that, you've got these kind of barriers to adoption that are sometimes man-made, sometimes not. It sounds like, John, culture is a factor. Would you agree?
Culture eats a strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right?
Right.
As they say, it's true. Yeah. I teach that stuff to my students all the time. We all know it. We need to challenge our culture in this country, in the UK. We need to wake up. We need to become more ambitious. Now is the time. Even if we find we are stuck in a market which is a bear for my product, now is the time to start thinking. Use your time productively. Link up with us. Send us an email. Just have a it's free. It's free. It's not going to cost you. I don't want to sell you anything. I don't want to say. A lot of people are trying to sell you digital. That's why a lot of manufacturers are being put off by the whole thing. So what? Yeah. It's not going to make me sexier and wealthier if I buy your digital product. No, it's not. But you know what? It may not leave you behind. But certainly, back to what Ben says, is this right for you? What do you really want to do? The survey you ran, Marcus, showed some certainty almost. Digital is here to stay and it's a player. Certainty doesn't mean you finished. Certainty has its own challenges. It creates more questions. How do you solve those questions? Create a network of critical friends, of people who are willing to help, and people who believe passionately in manufacturing in the UK. We are here. That's why we're here. We're not getting paid for this. We believe passionately the UK deserves to find its mojo again in manufacturing. We want the industrial strategy to actually supercharge itself, not just be left alone and let the market forces. We're past that now. Let's put some muscle behind it. That's why I'm excited about the work that Barry is doing. That's why I'm excited about the work that Ben is doing. That's why I'm excited that an OEM like Ricoh with Richard saying, I'm agnostic. Just you guys, what's good for you is good for us. So what I'm saying is we need a little bit of structure behind this. We need guidance. People need to become curious to create the next readiness level. And Ben talked about publications that BSI have. There are other online tools. You can score your readiness. And then what do? You need to talk to someone who understands IIoT platforms, because let's be honest, you need an IIoT platform. And by the way, don't buy a closed architecture one. Buy an open one. There are some things, best practice. Buy protocols that enable you to be stateful and agile in your creating of data, consuming of data. Just try to understand that. You need to look at your data like you look at your mobile phone, your smartphone. You do all your business on this right now. You need to think of your business exactly like that. Look at some of the big names that we all know, the Googles, the Amazons, the Apples, and the Facebooks, which have become a little bit too big and dominant. But what do? How do they win the game? They have credible information at the fingertips. How can you do that with your customers? Is there a need that is unmet? The next wave, there may be another one. Plan now, create the level of readiness that Ben talked about, and get some people to help you along with that. Now, if you're gonna use some of your COVID loan money to do that, that's a good thing. That's a good thing, I would say.
Yeah. So it's an opportunity now. Sorry, Ben. Yeah, I mean, just sort of following on from that, Ben, is in culture. Obviously, British culture is one thing, but culture of these businesses, it's about having an open mind and taking small steps.
Yeah, I mean, there was a report published recently by McKinsey online that was actually really quite interesting, and it wasn't focused on this crisis. It was focused on the last crisis that was caused by the banks, and it looked at companies that invested in that downturn during that period, and after that, subsequently, they outperformed their competitors by something like 30-40%, a silly number like that. So that culture of saying, yes, we're in a downturn, but now is the time to invest, just echoes what John says completely. But I understand where these companies are coming from, because if these technologies can't be proven to be worked for them, then they're not going to adopt, because those investments will sit in their balance sheet, depreciating away, eating their profits all the time. So I've told the story before, but I always come back to it. I was talking to the MD of a West Midlands contract manufacturer, SMA, and he wasn't convinced by Industry 4.0 at all, because what he said was, every time I hear the word, somebody's trying to sell me something, and it's something I don't want. So that market needs to work more effectively, and it needs to be working more towards creating solutions rather than creating one-off sales. Yeah,
Barry, would you agree with that? That's a common issue, isn't it? When you get buzzwords and so on, that it all sounds very exciting, but really it's quite threatening. And if someone's pushing something at you, you're kind of a bit of a turn off, isn't it?
It is a bit. I mean, I'm a career technologist, but I think, Ben was talking about, business. This is a business transformation thing. It's not a technology transformation, and it's not a big bang. It's not like, I can think big, but I need to start small. But it's really about, where do I start and where do I go next? So yeah, I mean, I'm echoing what the guys are saying. I mentioned before, we work cross-sector and kind of cross-size of organization. If you're an SME, there's a lot of talk about, agile and think big, start small and fail fast. Well, I think in this climate, if you're an SME, you can't afford to fail at all, right? That's a massive risk. I can't afford to put capital expense on the balance sheet, and try things out and have things sitting there. So I kind of need help with that kind of roadmap and where do I start, really? So, we're absolutely sort of seeing those kind of barriers now. Interesting, and I'll elaborate on it a little more, moving forward. But John says, there's free advice here, but not just advice, actually. Some people want the awareness, and that's a part of it. And by the way, it's not just awareness from the technologists in an organization, it's awareness to the engineering teams and the operations teams and the technology teams. It's bringing those personas together, because there are needs across all those personas that we need to bring together to form that business strategy. And then it's how do I try things out without necessarily investing. So for example, John mentioned, free things. So Made Smarter is a big program in the UK that people on this call may have heard of. It's an umbrella. It's really about how to drive transformation using industrial digital technology into UK industry. Well, there's a program at the moment, recognizing these kind of barriers, and it's squarely aimed at that. We're in pilot phase at the moment, but there's a number of digital hubs around the UK, in centres like the MCC, that have got test beds that are proving or providing capabilities around certain parts of process. Might be quality in the operation, aspect. It might be design, where we're pre-provisioning a process or a line, or optimizing it. So there's a number of test beds. We've got about 7 at the MCC, and organizations, any size of organization, a user can come along and understand what's going on, so raise their awareness levels from a business and technology point of view. But they can also exercise a use case as well. So there's no, diverting resources from their operations. They can maintain their operation, try things out, their use case in a real environment, not a pretend environment, where they can de-risk their decision before they go and make their decision. So there are real interventions, real practical interventions that John, Ben, Richard, alluded to, that are out there now that really play into these barriers to adoption. Now, of course, there are always a number of barriers to adoption. It's not just about where's my use case. Sometimes it's wider than that. We appreciate that, but you do have to sort of start somewhere. And organizations like some of the organizations on this call, they really can help frame that problem statement up, kind of frame that kind of roadmap as well, and look at how we might intervene along the way to accelerate that roadmap. So yeah, absolutely in agreement with the guys there. There are barriers, but there are means of remediating and addressing some of those barriers.
And that sounds cool. I mean, so in essence, somebody can test run digital manufacturing for them without it kind of impeding their actual existing manufacturing processes. So it minimizes disruption, de-risks the idea of investment, and kind of, I guess, it doesn't push a particular product at them either. No,
exactly. I think John mentioned there's everybody trying to sell me something. Well, I used to work for a commercial organization, and guess what? Ultimately, we wanted to, of course, people want to sell, but I think there is a lot of genuine sort of, if we can't deliver value, then you're not going to buy anything anyway, and you've got to invest. So of course, there's got to be some commercial transaction along the way. That there has to be, right? But I think to demyst and debunk that and really get over the sort of thinking about what do I need to think about, because my core business is my core business. This is an example of how organizations can just get involved, even if it's just to learn. But yeah, exactly that, Marcus. They can come along with their problem domain. Their problem domain might be, I've heard all about mixed reality, but how do I assist my operators on the line from a kind of quality inspection test point of view? That's a really manual thing, and maybe we've got complex products, and there's a lot of quality certification concerns, like in aerospace, for example, or automotive. How do we do that? So that sort of area would be an area that we can work with them on and actually try out a capability. The test beds, by the way, are also about creating jobs, and also nurturing startups and technology companies. So equally, an end user could come along, and or a tech provider, to trial out some new capability, if you like, and that might be a startup or scale up, if you like. So this is about encouraging, UK PLC, right, with skills, with jobs, with adoption. It's a whole ecosystem, and I think John mentioned go out and form partnerships, right? This is a partnership play. So as well as me coming in with my problem, I get to know other people. I get to know other agents of change like Cranfield, et cetera, like Ricoh, that can help me out. So there's the hard benefits, and there's the softer benefits as well. But this is just one program I'm just giving you an example of, that's the here and the now, that people can go registered interest, and it's free as well.
And what's the program called? What's it called?
Well, it's the Made Smarter. So it's under the auspices of Made Smarter, sponsored by Innovate UK. And it's the digital innovation hub program. And there's two sides to it. One's around smart factory and one's around smart supply chain. So there's two sort of key areas we think in the UK. If you listen to Sam Turner, I think somebody mentioned Sam before, CTO of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, you'll hear Sam talk very eloquently about problems and challenges in this sort of program. So people can find out about it, engage, simple expression of interest to start to run some of those use cases.
It's really interesting. Thanks for that, Barry. And so, Richard, I want to pull you in here, because Barry ended up talking there about solving problems, and it's often when we try and get excited about technology that does fantastic things but doesn't necessarily solve a commercial problem. And some of the things Barry also said chimed a little bit with how Ricoh Industrial Print approaches working with partners, isn't it? You kind of de-risking is a key thing there. Could you explain a bit about that?
First of all, qualifying in the first place. I think there is a the word digital, and that's partly why it's unclear. It's often unclear what do we mean by digital manufacturing? What do we mean by digital anything? And people don't buy things until they have clarity, until it's transparent and clear, clear, and it makes sense. I think digital is often something that the pushy guys actually just throw up as almost a smokescreen. And you must be impressed because I mentioned the word digital. There are lots of digital things that don't make any sense whatsoever, and there's plenty of people pushing them. I think it's deadly important at the moment that people actually make very certain that what they're investing in, what they're putting the cash into, is actually something that's going to deliver what they expect. And I think we've got here a panel of people who are in studying, teaching, implementing, and monitoring in some ways, Ben, to make sure that the whole process of change delivers what's necessary at the end. Now, some people set out on a digital path. Most of our work is involved in developing capability to do something by inkjet means in an industry. And they're just following that buzz, really, and it doesn't really make sense to do it. So I think identifying the problem is essential. I think I wanted to go back to a point on culture. I think it's been described by some government people and some others internationally that we're actually at war with the virus, and this is a wartime. Every one of us is a soldier, and so on. I think that's true. And what happens generally after a war is that it becomes evident that people's thoughts have changed during the war. And what the status quo was before no longer exists. That is a function of how long the war goes on. But I don't like to keep mentioning war anyway, but you know what I mean? It's a time when everything's shaken up, thrown up in the air, and people actually have to reevaluate everything. Now we have some cases in ventilators, PPE, medical equipment, the things that were in short supply, where something needed to happen fast, some collaboration, new collaboration between people who wouldn't have necessarily collaborated in that way before. That happens. And that's what people are expecting more of, because they see the speed at which it can achieve things. So there are new things, new capabilities, and I think it is still quite difficult at the current time in many countries to actually physically put our heads together and to actually carry out some of those things. So whether there's a test bed and you can actually go to it, it's not so easy, but it will become easy as things are freed off and we actually conquer this virus. And I think that what will show up is that people's views have changed. That's going to be consumers, customers, and manufacturers. And I think whereas it might have been, people might have been too busy to have some new thinking, to adopt new thinking, to decipher what that new thinking should be. They've then struggled with, full occupancy on the problems of today, and they're thinking about the longer term solutions of tomorrow, which probably doesn't involve doing things the same way as they've done them before in some cases. In other cases, it definitely should be that people return to the way they've done things before. So I think identifying what the problem is and making sure you're addressing it is definitely important.
And I guess that's sort of following on really that often if things fail, it's because they're trying to solve the wrong problem. And then that puts other people off, and that gives the new technology a bad name. Sorry, Barry, you wanted to contribute there.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in. We're talking about new opportunities and doing things differently, re-envisioning things. It's not, we're not just talking about digitizing what we do today. We are talking as well about transforming, what we do, new business model opportunities, new industries, the hydrogen industry or nuclear with small modular reactors. There's whole new industries being formed that will be required to do things in a different way. So one of our members at the MTC, so BAE Systems, that people will have heard of, they're involved in leading the program, the future of fighter capability out of the UK, to the Tempest program, which will be a massive supply chain, in terms of what's going on. 2025 is sort of a sort of key point, sort of decision of the go forward. But if we want to, in the UK, be involved in that industry, then things like Tempest need to be successful. But Tempest, it's a different business model. It's going to be 50% cheaper than the previous fighter capability, delivered 50% quicker, but ultimately the business model will change as well. Whereas before, it was UK placing a massive order for a new program, the business model with Tempest will be much more about export first. So it'll be much more about smaller runs, much more specialization for particular customers. So Richard mentioned, customer expectations and what's required. So ultimately, the whole program needs to be delivered differently, and digital manufacturing will be at the heart of that. I mean, for example, I heard a figure from one of our team involved in additive manufacturing. Additive manufacturing will be a significant part of it. Flexible manufacturing, in terms of how we design and build things, will be a fundamental part of it. So there'll be all sorts of business reasons which filter into the capabilities, which filter into, amongst other things, a lot of digital interventions to make that happen. That's one example of an industry that's really reinventing itself in terms of how we go to market and what we do. So for suppliers, and there'll be thousands of them, including SMEs, they will need to be part of the program, right? They will need to change and adjust and be much more integrated, because that, multiple orders for different specializations of highly complex, that's a massive problem in terms of order management and logistics and supply chain. So we can't just work with, time, quality, cost as a metric in the supply chain. We need to be much more real time. And John mentioned that use of data, and data, for example, into supply chain will be a fundamental part of that. So that's just one example of a significant industry which will be really reinventing itself, utilizing digital manufacturing at its core.
Yeah, so that's really exciting. And go on, John. Yeah.
Sorry, to agree with all that, Tempest is a massive opportunity and a great challenge for the UK manufacturers. It's really refreshing to see BAE Systems going that way from the weapons of mass destruction. But here's the other thing, and I think Richard mentioned it: the world will have a different status quo, and who knows? There may be perpetual challenges coming up in the world. Right now, we know climate is a huge issue, and we know digital is part of the toolbox that can help us do some stuff. Let me put a warning to everybody who thinks the digital data is going to save the world. It's probably going to kill the world if we're not careful with it, because every gigabyte of your data, of my data, over a 10-year period of time, 1.5 kilograms of CO2, ladies and gents. So don't think data is free. Data is not free. Data equals energy. And right now, 65% of our energy comes from hydrocarbons. So even now with this, we are creating CO2. We have an energy problem, and I think there's a refreshing commitment on the UK government to go big on renewables. How about every time someone wants to build a data center, there's a regulation that says you won't get a license unless you are going to use renewable energy for powering the data center. How about that? Okay, we have legacy issues. I know we have some smelters, we have some big polluters. There's an impetus there to do something. But anything new coming up, use renewable energy. How about that? Let's start with the new as a way of digital manufacturing and renewable energy. But I also wanted to say something else based on what Barry said, and Richard. What we're seeing is that there's a question mark. People are afraid of what they don't understand. And I know Peter Menson put it on the chat. It's not about selling, buy some digital. Go buy the technologies. Actually, what is this? No, we try to unpack 4.0, digital transformation, digital manufacturing, what's IIoT. People do not know about those things. It's just a big chaos. Here's the thing. We need to learn. I'm willing to create small courses, like a 2-hour course that will get you on the baseline of understanding this. If you don't, then you can have your money back. How about that?
I'll sign up to it, John.
Pardon?
I'll sign up to it, John.
Well, you can actually sponsor it, Richard. That would be great. Feel free to do so. So it should be a sign. Maybe we should run this. Maybe the next thing is we do an hour of here's the basics. We'll give you a certificate out of that. You really get it.
No, John, you said 2 hours. You said 2 hours. I'm feeling cheated now.
2 hours. Okay, all right. The second hour, you're sponsoring it, Richard. But here's the thing. Digitalizing chaos is more chaos. How about that? So if someone says, The first thing I would ask someone who says, I want to go be a player in digital, I say, have you created flow in your business right now? Or is every day a big like climbing Everest type of feeling? Are you feeling exhausted at the end of the day because you haven't really looked at the creating flow in your business? How can you create a situation where your people show up and everything runs smoothly because you have figured out how to go from A to B to Z to Z in a smooth way without dramas? If you haven't created that, don't digitalize that because it's going to cause you a lot of problems. So value stream mapping, those tried and tested tools of here's the as is, I mapped it. And now I'm going to go to the to be state with a bit of digital. Maybe I need some help there. I need to say, all right, my flow is going to be a little different now. I need some help. I need some critical eyes there to help me do that. So first, create flow, then go to digital.
So what I like that. So digitalizing chaos equals more chaos. It's a fair comment. And Richard, this is a theme that you've picked up on before, isn't it? About explain a bit about it. I don't want to.
Well, I completely agree with that. If you actually just digitize something that doesn't actually serve a purpose now, then you're wasting your time. If you just try and tickle at the edges with a bit of digital in the current process with the current business model, it doesn't really address the problem. So if you take it as one example, John, you said you're involved in packaging. Packaging is producing millions and millions, all the same, in one place, and then with that central distribution, sometimes intercontinental. If you can digitize that as much as you like, but if the output is the same, then it's still not good. If you do it closer to customer, at least in one country across Europe, for example, if you do it in the country, you don't need to put 14 languages on your pack and make it so small that nobody can read it. That's an example of a physical digitization, which makes sense.
Amazing example. I love it.
It doesn't make sense to digitize a process so that you can produce 14 languages of tiny statutory text and then expect that that's going to improve anything. So trying to use the same hub and distribution system supply chains with existing product is not good, and it's just wasteful to even think of digitizing it. Another example, you mentioned carbon emissions. Textile. When you're buying some clothing, one of the major differentiators is not the fabric itself, it's actually the pattern that's on it, the print that's on it, the decoration. If you do that centrally in Bangladesh and just you can't see the pollution, so it doesn't matter. So you produce, trying to plan and provide in a Stalinist way what Western markets might need and might want, and then you tell them what they might need and want by advertising and so on. And they buy some of it, and then you filter down to develop less developed markets, and you have to cascade to get rid of the waste, and eventually, maybe as a brand owner, you burn it. That's a silly idea. That's the way it is. You can digitize that as much as you like, and you can replace the analog devices and the analog manufacturing in Bangladesh with digital, but it's still got the same problems. The capability should be extended towards closer to the customer, so that makes much more sense. And you're changing from a push system, a traditional system that's based on the analog paradigm, and you replace it with something that uses digital capability. That needs a different device. So we see some people who are taking technology, inkjet technology, and they're trying to create something which is an analog copy. That doesn't make sense.
No, that's kind of missing the point, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm not missing the point. The next item on the agenda was companies that don't see the point of digital manufacturing. Is that because they don't understand it, or because actually it is only really an approach that's relevant to some markets and not others? Barry, let's enjoy you in here.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we always get the people that are maybe either resisting for different reasons or don't see the point. There are different reasons, right? But it might literally just
some of them valid, Barry.
Some of them are absolutely valid, and I think that's the point which we're all trying to make here, aren't we? We're trying to say, actually, there's got to be a reason. There's got to be a reason to move, and there's got to be a business case, and we might have a bigger vision, and then there's how do we get there? And let's not just digitize it just because it's a process. Let's think about the alternatives. By the way, the textile industry is a really good example. I used to work in that industry. There's a lot of water consumption, a lot of waste, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a really good example. So I think, all that kind of said, people still might be in the situation where actually I've got my order book, it all works quite well. Yes, I could always be a bit more efficient, but I just don't see the sort of trade-off. I think there are different, kind of angles to this. I mean, my encouragement is really learn a little bit more about some of the things we said, and there are routes to do that, and kind of validate with yourself, actually, should I be, because I just think it's a timing thing really here as well. I think it's not always right at a time, but that preparedness and readiness and awareness is kind of key, because I would argue that sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. So I think it's about raising awareness and about using other people, like some of the people on this call and others, that network to help kind of validate the opportunity. People might be talking to you about possibly different markets that you might want to go in. We've got clients at the moment, they've got a very stable order book, but all of a sudden their supply chain got broken. So they had to inshore back into the UK and stand up a new facility. And actually, that was an opportunity to look at exploring things in a different way. So I think there are ways of stressing your business, and maybe that network, not just talking about technology, is kind of valuable. Just one other thing I would say, we've not mentioned cybersecurity, and that's a whole massive topic, but we sort of start to talk about Internet of Things, and all of a sudden we're kind of going beyond the physical four walls of a factory environment, say, into this kind of, outside the firewall, and all of a sudden I think people's perception changes a little bit. So that is a barrier for adoption, but like everything else here, it's a trade-off, and it's about taking advice on what data could be public and what's key and what should we look down. Interestingly, in aerospace, which is super duper secure and defense, interestingly, at Rolls-Royce, they've got this R² data labs now where they're really brokering and exposing lots of information so they can encourage a whole ecosystem to innovate using it. So these barriers and the senses of what my business is and I don't need to change are being changed and stressed. So I just argue, just go and get a sense check and get some ideas. And if it's a timing thing, then that's one thing. If it's a no for now, or I think you're gonna find something different if you go and ask some of those questions, really.
Yeah. And Ben, sort of draw you in here. It's the next on the agenda, really sort of Barry's kicked us off there. Steps to success. Clearly speaking to relatively independent organizations that have access to expertise to trial things. What kind of steps would you suggest to your partners and clients? Obviously it's a marathon by the sounds of it, as opposed to a sprint. But is it? I mean, given where we are now, it could be a sprint as well, could it?
Well, it can be. If you put in the right preparation. See, as we saw last year, there are opportunities from other sectors that you haven't necessarily had a background in, that if you can work with people quite quickly and get the right guidance, the right information in place to do so, you can actually exploit those opportunities quite quickly. So it's all about business strategy and business planning, getting the right processes in place. That will enable you to move quickly when you need to. So that bit might be a marathon, but it will enable you to sprint at the right time in future.
Yeah. And is that what you do? I mean, at BSI, you work with people to help them with their strategy.
We do all kinds of stuff. I work with the Catapult on technical standards for interoperability. We're also working with people such as John's colleagues at Cranfield to guide manufacturers on their strategies and at the business level. So we go all the way from right at the device level, at the technical level, through to the business level at the top.
Yeah, and thank you. And John, steps towards success. Have you got any kind of key things that you will want to share before we kind of wrap up in terms of step for success?
Get curious. Number one step to success. Get curious. Ask. Find the time. I know making payroll the cash flow problems right now are number one for all people. But become curious. Think about tomorrow. As Richard says, it's going to be a completely different game. Get some help. Don't get left behind. Get ambitious. There's a lot to take in, but start by becoming curious and try and understand what's going on, and get some help. Find people who will explain you the things, not by reading obscure academic papers. About we write in graphic. Okay, we have to go all the way, right? But make it real. What does it mean for me? Where can I find that I can understand what are my options going forward? Because I would say even certainty raises its own questions. And there's one thing certain: there's going to be more uncertainty. So go get curious, educate yourself. The money you spend, the time you spend there is going to pay dividends. It's going to give you the degree of confidence to find your own competitive domain in business. And that's step number one. Step number two is try and understand a little bit about how to get away from your data silos. That's a huge barrier for 4.0 type of digital transformation, and which internet platform you want to try and do that with. And this is where you need a little bit of help. By the way, I'll say one thing, and I can explain when people reach out to me. It's the Russian dolls principle of data architecture that you really, really want to go with.
So it's really sort of thinking about it deeply, getting serious, and then looking at the data come through as the key thing there. Looking at the year ahead, Richard, because that is the kind of title of this session before we completely finish. Last year was a massive change, and do you see a sort of similar year panning out ahead?
Well, I think this thing's gone on for long enough. It's if it finished next month, then there's enough of a shake-up to what we knew before for it to have been kind of game-changing. The year ahead, I don't think is going to be much different to the past year. As John said, there's one thing that's certain, and that is there's more uncertainty. I spoke to somebody who's saying that you can't stop life in this pandemic. We got to get used to the next get prepared for the next pandemic. Whether it's a pandemic or something else, it's a changing world, and what we've learned is that it's going to be difficult to do things the same as we've done them before in the future. I think there'll be, as I said, after you come out of a virtual wartime, you kind of change your mind during the time that you're less able and constrained. You change your mind, and then you think of what might emerge, and it's not necessarily what was before. It's not getting back to where we were before. There are lots of different ideas. People have lots of different ideas, and I agree with what's being said. Curiosity, looking into things, and I've read something on the chat about the off-putting element of pushy digital people who mention the word digital and they're trying to flog something. So nobody on this panel is doing this for money. Nobody's actually doing it to sell anything. There's people. John's actually offered 2 hours several times, and before he actually talked about sponsorship as well. So he's prepared to teach us all. We've got free of charge services and test beds that are supplied and available. This is all in the UK. Unfortunately, I'm sure we've got a European audience too. Ben's there. He's not asking for any money. He's going to do everything he can for free of charge. Is that right, Ben? and from the Ricoh perspective, I don't think we're in the business in industrial technology. We're not in the business of supplying end customers. We're actually a technology component in systems that are created by others. But I think you're never going to avoid the guy that actually tries to sell something and puts digital in front of it just to give it credibility. You're never going to avoid that, but don't switch off if digital is mentioned. Try and stay switched on and discerning so that you can decipher whether it's actually something useful or not, because I think that everybody will need to learn more as time goes on. Hopefully here I've learned a lot, and I think we've got a group of learned people here who are very able to help.
Yeah, thanks for that. And the year ahead, just Barry, do you agree with Richard? It's going to be similar kind of state of play?
I mean, I don't want to repeat all those things.
No,
I think I agree with all those. The only thing I would say is that there will be more interventions to help. Yes, just from a UK point of view, we've got a wider audience, but there'll be lots of interventions. There's lots of levelling up. There's lots of industrial challenges, and there's lots of funding kind of coming that way. We and my organisation are sort of lobbying the government around some of those things. So I think there's going to be lots of opportunity, and we're seeing green shoots, right? Obviously, we're in a crisis, but the vaccine's coming out. We all know the story, right? Hopefully we'll be done with the Brexit transition, and we'll be a bit more smoother on those sorts of things. So I think it's kind of springtime, opportunity time, which times quite nicely with some of these interventions. But yeah, go get guidance. There are interventions out there to think big, be curious. Get on the stepping stones to that vision. There are those things out there that everybody can tap into.
Brilliant. Ben, anything? Year ahead?
Well, yeah, just again not to repeat anything that any of the previous speakers have said, but don't forget the rate of innovation that is happening. In the last 4 weeks, we've for the first time seen on the market mass production new tablets, and we haven't yet managed to see the things put into place where we can really control the distribution and the dosing of those things. So there's some really good opportunities there for people looking to solve those problems.
Brilliant. So now is the time to innovate, be curious, get serious, put in place some basic plans, get help actually, and look at what possibilities out there to trial things out and minimize risk. And it's a positive time to be involved with digital, as much as we sort of think that is an overused term. I think it's an exciting time. So thank so much to all of you for being part of this. Really cool. We could carry on. I think we'll probably do some kind of follow-up, and I will I'll share your details with the delegates that are registered and so on, so they can get in touch with you directly. But appreciate your time and your contributions. So, and thanks to everyone for joining our first webinar of the year. Thank you very much.